There's one from Margaret. Will there ever come a time when the government says it's impossible, we cannot take any more people into this country? There has to be a limit. And it's rather interesting. It does rather go back, whether you're left-wing, right-wing, doesn't really matter. But surely we'd all agree there is a sort of degree of groupthink that seems, and this goes beyond just this country. And if you certainly take a bloc like the EU, there is obviously political reasons why there's groupthink, because there are agreed policies and diktats from the collective nations within it. But even sort of prior to that, there is a sort of Western idea of how governments are meant to do business. And no one dares muck with the system or mess with the system. You just get, it would keep it like this. Everybody understands it. The civil servants, be they in Germany, France, Spain or the UK, they all understand it. The main parties understand it. Let's not meddle. Let's just keep things nicely. No one really, I think, looks for, you know, running governments is actually quite hard work, believe it or not, whether you're in the civil service or the actual government. It takes a lot. So the last thing you want to start doing is messing around with the system and almost trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's why we often end up with these kind of curious Gordian knot moments in politics, because no one really has the kahunas to say we need substantial change on just how we do business. And that might be the answer to things. I heard one former Labour peer, Lord Glassman, actually say the other day on an interview he'd abolished the Treasury and moved the Treasury essentially into number 10. I mean, the Treasury works very independent of the Prime Minister. It's surprising. We all remember how autonomous Gordon Brown was in the Tony Blair years. Give us a clue, Gordon, he once said, one day before a budget. He didn't know what was in it. And he was arguing that you need to just lose the Treasury in its current form, get it into number 10. And no one can say you need that many bods in the 21st century running things. If you needed 30,000 people in 1975, you don't need 30,000 people in 2025, right? Groupthink. Status quo. These are the enemies of progress, maybe. 0344 499 1000. And here's an area that has a connecting sort of interest in terms of a big government department. This is the Home Office. Spent £1 million on mass fatality tents, which could store up to 700 bodies in case of emergency. This sparks fears, of course, of undisclosed threats, naturally. Terrorism risks are still substantial. Disease concerns like Ebola. Are the government hiding something, or is this just standard fare? Who knows? Let's speak to a man who knows this territory well. Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to Yvette Cooper. Danny, good afternoon to you. I mean, when you read that there was actually some job adverts, I'm sure you saw these, saying, you know, anyone want to apply for this contract, we need the tents and all that goes with it in case, you know, you need to either refrigerate or keep or store 700 bodies. And I was reading that thinking, man, is there something we don't know here? Is something hiding around the corner, Danny, or is this just standard practice?
Afternoon, Ian. It's a bit alarming, isn't it? At first sight, you do think, what is the Home Office not telling us?
Yeah.
But I think actually the truth is, it's rather more prosaic than that. It's a bit mundane and a bit routine. I think what the Home Office is doing is it's had a contract, I think, for the past couple of years to provide contingency support to local authorities should there be some terrible event, another pandemic or a terrible terrorist atrocity or some other major event that causes a huge loss of life. And it's just having those contingencies to be able to offer support to local authorities if they need tents or storage compounds of some kind. You know, some of it will be refrigerated so that bodies can be kept and stored and all the appropriate procedures can be gone through. So it's doing those things, those kind of boring things that don't really get any headlines unless when there is some terrible incident and there is a pandemic, everyone says, well, where was the preparation? Why didn't you plan for this? I mean, that's what we've got a COVID inquiry partly for at the moment is, you know, who's been looking at the preparations or the lack of preparations and the warnings that, you know, a pandemic might be coming and we weren't prepared for it. So I suppose it's the kind of although the headline looks rather shocking, it's something that's fairly routine and standard and probably quite sensible.
Without sounding too macabre about it, Danny, when I read this, I oddly, I thought, well, if you were preparing for something substantial, a big outbreak or, you know, some kind of horrendous terror attack, then 700 doesn't seem that many, to be honest.
I'm not quite sure where they get the number from.
Yes, I wonder whether is there some kind of science behind the number, I wonder.
You know, I don't know. I imagine there is some kind of science behind it. There's some kind of calculation about the level of capacity that local authorities have already, and they do have some capacity, and then what the Home Office could do in addition. And then perhaps there are some plans, you know, that could tide you over for a certain length of time. And then if they needed to procure more storage facilities, then they could do that. But you know, it seems to me that this is, you know, fairly sensible. The Home Office is saying the capability has existed since 2005 and it has been maintained under all governments. So this isn't something that Labour has just conjured up, it would seem. But it's something that, you know, in the event that it's needed, it's there. Whether that be, as we said, a terrorist atrocity or a pandemic or some other natural disaster. And obviously, you know, we know that the weather seems to be getting more extremes. It's possible that there could be something of that ilk as well.
Danny, always great, thorough stuff from you, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary. Let's speak with Professor David Alexander, Professor of Emergency Planning and Management at the UCL. Afternoon to you, David.
Afternoon.
I'm sure you're listening to some of this because this is territory you know very well, thinking, you know, this is why they do it. They'd be damned if they did, damned if they didn't. Is this, firstly, this is standard stuff in a Western democracy, shall we say, right?
It absolutely is. I can remember when I was on a regional resilience forum in 2004, we were debating this, but we didn't have any money to do anything about it. One thing to bear in mind here is that after the Indian Ocean tsunami, 492 Swedes dead were repatriated to Sweden. The mortuary service couldn't cope with it. There was chaos and the government fell in the ensuing scandal. This is really quite important. London has had a mass fatality plan since about 2005. It put it into action during the London bombings when 52 people in London were killed and 4 terrorists. There is a reason for this, and the reason is that you need to do autopsies and recognition of bodies collectively. You don't disperse the bodies to different places. That's very important. And this is a service for the living, not for the dead. It's a service for the bereaved families and so on. And it needs to be done with great sensitivity and great care.
And so forensically speaking, this is also about protecting evidence. Would that be fair?
It's about identifying bodies where that may be necessary, and it's about collecting evidence, and it's about the future of safety, because we need to know how people died, why they died, and what the circumstances were.
Yeah,
and that will be true for disease as well.
Of course. And when it comes to threats, I mean, you know, you can always sit there and plan for many, many threats, and then one comes around the corner that you haven't planned for. But I suppose that's the random nature of life.
We try to use foresight here, and we try to look at things that might or might not happen. We try to project the trends into the future and see whether these things are likely to become more probable than they are at present. And we try to be as ready as we can without being excessive in our demands for resources.
In terms of numbers, is there any specific science behind the number 700? 700 bodies could be stored in these fatality tents.
I would say none whatsoever. It's probably related to the amount of space required. In a mortuary, you have to have a wet area and a dry area. You have to have an area for looking after the relatives if they come along to identify the bodies. You have to have an area which is suitable for funeral services to come and pick up the bodies, and so on and so forth. That's a lot of space. London has identified, I think, 11 places where the temporary mortuary can be put up if needed. I don't think they could necessarily cope with much more than this. But the important thing is that they do the very best they can if we are in the unfortunate situation of having a mass casualty event, whatever it may be. But let's also remember that pandemics are recurrent.
True.
Influenza pandemics have about a 40-year cycle.
What are the sort of areas in your work, David, and your research that you look at and can, I mean, is there a kind of a type of emergency that is appearing to be more possible than others?
That is extremely hard to say, but let's remember that in the British National Risk Register, pandemics have always been top of the list as worst consequences and most likely. The register started in 2008. It's been revised roughly every 2 years, bit irregularly, but anyway, the latest edition is of this year. And in all of the editions, pandemics are top of the list. Now, pandemics are variable in terms of their fatality rate, also in terms of their transmissibility, your chance of getting it, if you get it, your chance of dying. Yeah. But we have to be ready for situations where we might be in the worst of those cases, as we were in 1918, 1920, very lethal and very easy to transmit.
Well, we all keep our fingers crossed, hoping none of these things happen, of course.
Well,
that's the peculiarity of your job, I suppose, and those that take on the contracts for this kind of stuff. Listen, David, great to have you on, sir. Thank you. Professor David Alexander, he's Professor of Emergency Planning and Management at the UCL. I mean, I do kind of get it. Look, they've planned for this, as he said, 20 years. They've had these kind of specific contingency plans. Fatality tends to store multiple hundreds of bodies in case something horrendous happens, be it a terror attack or, more likely, some other kind of pandemic